All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. It's official now as the USC Trojans football team has played its last game under the Pac 12 banner. The men of Troy capped off an underwhelming season with a convincing 42 to 28 win over Louisville in the Holiday Bowl in San Diego last night. But there are many questions for the Trojans as they bid farewell to the Pac 12 and hello to the Big Ten. The first one is USC ready for life in the Big Ten? And I say this because obviously, clearly, the Trojans have agreed to go to this league. But, it was all of these decisions, they're done by school presidents, folks that, they're looking for the benefits of a top tier football program as far as the money goes, but not the realistic of realization rather of things. And I say this because no disrespect to the Pac-12 over the years, but the Big Ten is a much more physical football league, and I want to be interested to see how USC transitions to that and how quickly it's going to be for them to transition for that to that. The cross country travel, and of course this is going to be a big question for this conference, another conference like the Big 12 as well, the ACC, adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. It's all about that cross country travel. However, it's not too bad for USC, at least in year one. And I'll touch on that in a couple of minutes. But then, for the Trojans, it looks like they answered one big question last night as first and foremost, they found their replacement for the 2022 Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback in Caleb Williams. And I'm talking about Miller Moss because, of course, Caleb Williams decided to sit out the Holiday Bowl. One would have to assume that he's going to declare for the NFL draft sooner rather than later. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's clearly going to be the number one overall pick in April's NFL draft. And it's one of those, yes, USC had a disappointing season, but it's not because of the effort of Caleb Williams. I mean, if USC's defense had been better, we're probably talking about a 10-win team right now. But nonetheless, getting back to Miller Moss and what he did last night in this Lincoln Riley offense, 23 or 33 passing for 372 yards with 6 touchdowns and a pick against the Cardinals. And it's one of those, he kept the Holiday Bowl tradition going. I mean, going back to the days at Jack Murphy Stadium, this contest has always been known for the prolific performances of the offenses, most importantly, the quarterbacks. And of course, Miller Moss had a big time performance last night. And, if you're a USC fan, you're hopeful that he's going to build off of that and do even bigger and better things in 2024. One big question for USC, they got to try to find a way to fix a defense that was 119th in the nation last season. Lincoln Riley, changes were going to come. He fired Alex Grinch mid-season. Clearly didn't want to do it, but he had no choice as at the rate that this USC defense was giving up yardage and points. But then hiring D'Anton Lynn, away from rival UCLA. That was very interesting for me right there. Of course, USC and UCLA are still going to be rivals now in the Big Ten, but nonetheless, getting your new defensive coordinator rather from the crosstown rival. Let's see how much of a change he can make on this USC defense because as quiet as it's kept, UCLA's defense was one of the better defenses in the nation this past season, and they were a big reason why the Bruins won a lot of contests because they shut people down. And typically, when you think about a Chip Kelly team, you don't think about their defense, but that was the case for UCLA. So obviously, USC is hopeful that Lynn can do the same thing for them. Now, speaking of Lincoln Riley, he's 19-8 in his 2 years as the head coach of USC. One thing's for sure, nearly half of those losses came against Utah. He doesn't have to worry about facing the Utes anymore, at least in his league, because the Utes are going to the Big 12. But nonetheless, Lincoln Riley people forget what a strong campaign that Lincoln Riley and SC had in 2021, just due to the fact that it didn't end well for them with the Caleb Williams injury in the Pac 12 championship game against Utah. And then, of course, how this team, most importantly, this defense, took a huge step back in 2023, and they were unable to live up to the expectations. And I said 2021, I meant 2022. Excuse me, as Lincoln Riley's first year in LA with USC. But as the men of Troy look to transition to the Big Ten, obviously, they still got to recruit and they got to find a way to keep those California kids in their fold and not lose them nationally. Because it's going to be very interesting to see how recruiting changes due to this latest round of college football realignment. But nonetheless, you look at USC's schedule for next year, and like I said, the travel buffs at the Big Ten, were nice to USC as far as, when you think about it, how many trips east were the Trojans going to have to make? And honestly, it's manageable from that standpoint, but then there's not a lot of cushiony spots or cupcakes rather on this schedule for the men of Troy. I mean, don't get me wrong, there weren't a lot of soft spots this past year and in recent years, honestly, in the Pac 12. And, obviously, this edition of the Pac 12 is breaking up and it's very sad, from a historical standpoint. But I think nationally, I don't think the Pac 12 has gotten a lot of credit over the last couple of years for being a strong conference. It's due to the fact that they didn't have a representative in the college football playoff. And a lot of that was just due to the fact that they beat up on each other. We saw them beat up on each other again this year. But of course, Washington was able to survive. And actually, Washington was the first team since the Pac 12 went to 12 teams once they added Colorado and Utah that actually finished undefeated both in conference and overall. So that just gives you an idea of how tough this conference is. But nonetheless, getting back to USC schedule for 2024, not a lot of soft spots. They begin in a familiar spot at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas when they take on LSU out of the SEC. That's going to be a big time matchup. More than likely, both of those schools are going to be ranked in the top 20 heading into that contest. Their home opener against Utah State, a team that's more than likely going to replace them, if you want to call it that, in the new Pac 12. As you know, Washington State and Oregon State are looking to rebuild. After a bye week, USC gets their first indoctrination into the Big Ten. How? By going to the Big House in Ann Arbor on September 21st to take on Michigan, which is then followed by hosting Wisconsin at the Coliseum on the 28th. Then they're right back on the road, this time in Minneapolis, to take on Minnesota before they host Penn State on the 12th. And this is going to be a question for me, okay? Because I want to see the start time for this game. But on the 19th of October, USC, they're going to have to travel east. They got to go to College Park to take on Maryland. That should be a very interesting showdown there. And then they come back and host Rutgers at the Coliseum the following Saturday. And then a familiar foe, if you will, as they make the trip to Seattle to begin November to take on Washington before their off week rather, and then they finish up, and they don't have to travel too much on those last three games. They host Nebraska on the 16th of November. They're at the Rose Bowl against UCLA on the 23rd. So of course, there's no travel really right there, just through Southern California traffic. And then of course, they finish up at home by hosting the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. So, like I said, travel wise, going cross country, I think SC was spared in year number one. It's going to be very interesting to see how that changes or how much it changes because, it's one of those where when you have an 18 team conference like the Big Ten now does, it's all about balance. You're not going to see teams face each other consistently like we're accustomed to. The only consistent team that you're going to see USC more than likely face in conference is going to be UCLA. But nonetheless, if you're USC, you got to be happy with what you saw from Miller Moss last night. It's something that is definitely a building block as this team transitions to a new league. It's too early to say how USC is going to look in the Big Ten next year. We don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a transfer portal, there's still signing day. And typically, when you think about teams going to a new conference, there's always a transition period as far as that team getting adjusted to the new league and vice versa. This is very interesting right here, and it's going to be very interesting because typically a school might change the league, but they're still somewhat in the same region. And obviously, USC is not the same, not the only school that's going to be going through this. Oregon, Washington, and UCLA as well. We're going to see it in the Big 12. We've already seen it in the Big 12. And, I've expressed my thoughts on that as well. So it's going to be very interesting for the men of Troy, but at least one thing is for sure. They look like they've got themselves another quarterback in Miller Moss. And that's one thing under Lincoln Riley that you've never really had to question. You think about go back to his time at Oklahoma and the quarterbacks that he coached there, and then of course bringing a guy like Caleb Williams from Norman to Los Angeles with him did a lot of things for him, and also probably did a lot of things for him recruiting wise at the position. You see all the guys that have coached that have played under him rather that have gone on to be high picks in the NFL draft, number one overall picks at that. And Caleb Williams is about to be the next one. But nonetheless, if you're USC, you got to be happy with what you saw from Miller Moss. It was bittersweet. We knew this day was coming, their final game while flying that Pac 12 banner. But for the men of Troy, it's on to the Big Ten. And let's just see how they adjust and adapt to the new league. And let's also see how the new league adjusts and adapts to USC. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, excuse me, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.